The conflict in Libya has forced Europe to come face to face with a new reality. Going to war under the NATO banner without the leadership of the United States. This has never happened before. So how are the Europeans reacting to this sudden change in American attitude towards NATO? What is the European view of the war in Libya? Will there be European boots on the ground in Libya? This is your host, Sarwar Kashmeri, in conversation with Juurd Eijsvoogel, the international relations columnist for the well-known Dutch daily NRC Handelsblatt. Eijsvoogel, it turned out, had just returned from the NATO ministerial in Berlin when I caught up with him at his offices in Amsterdam. Here's our conversation. You were at the ministerial in Berlin. Is there a headline that you can give us?
My headline would probably be NATO calls for patience, which expresses that, well, NATO starts to realize that in Libya they started something, they're involved in something now that may take quite a bit longer than they thought initially.
Right.
That things are not going as expected. So I think it is sort of a sobering experience for NATO.
Do you think it's politically as well as economically a sobering experience?
I think that for a long time this idea of costs fall where they lie where they fall, that's a very controversial way of paying for things in NATO, but it's still the way that things are being paid for.
Right.
And a number of countries have tried to change it, but have not been able to do that. However, I don't think it's the main problem for countries here that are unhappy with the Libya operation.
Right.
I think the main problems are politically and militarily from nature. I think you see on the one hand that the effectiveness of the operation, the military effectiveness, is still not clear, and on the other hand, you still see that the unity that is so important in NATO isn't there either. So I think those are the main problems NATO is facing now. Whereas, of course, at the same time, it's still involved in this very complicated war in Afghanistan.
The Financial Times is reporting this morning that the American Vice President, Mr. Biden, has made a speech that the Europeans in NATO have all the capability they need. What they lack is the political will to be effective. Do you agree with his statement?
I think I agree with the fact that they don't have the political will. If they do have the capability, I don't know. It's the capability to really stop the fighting or stop the threats of the Libyan civilians in cities. I don't know if anybody has the military means to do that,
right?
Except for maybe the rebels themselves. But then you're talking about street-to-street fighting.
Yes.
However, I do agree. I think it's very, very clear what the Vice President says, that United States has other priorities, strategic priorities, also in the Middle Eastern region, and it's giving priority to these other areas, and to Egypt, to Iran. And so Libya is not on the first. It's not on America's plate. That's what he's saying, and so the Europeans have to pull the weight there. And it would be very interesting to see if this is sort of the NATO of the future that we're seeing here, where the United States, that has always been in the forefront and pushing other countries to do more, now is sort of taking the back seat in this Libya operation and letting France and Britain do the heavy lifting.
How about in the Netherlands itself? I mean, we've been reading about the dramatic layoffs of almost 20% of the military force and dismantling all the tanks and selling off fighter aircraft. I mean, what is the feeling there in Netherlands as far as Libya especially, but also being involved in military adventures in general?
You saw in Afghanistan that the Dutch government had great difficulty in reintroducing a modest force, a police training force in Afghanistan after they left their rather serious military force in the south of Afghanistan.
Yes.
You're right to say that there are very serious cuts in the military budget, and so I don't think there is much eagerness in the Netherlands to engage in Libya. And at the moment, there is this rotating command of the two European battle groups, And as it happens, the Dutch are now in charge. They have this rotating command of one of the two battle groups, one of the two European battle groups. So there is in government circles a little tension and a lot of relief when it became clear that this European decision will not mean that the battle group will be sent out anytime soon. That would be both from a financial point of view, but also for public opinion, very very hard to explain that maybe 1,200 Dutch military in this battle group would be deployed to Libya.
In closing, then, let me ask you if there's any way to summarize the European opinion today in two respects. One, America's position moving to the background, and two, the engagement in Libya.
I think in the first instance, America's position, I think in European political circles, still people hardly realize what's going on here. Is this really for serious that now within NATO we will see more often coalitions of the willing and the United States not being part of that kind of coalition or not being in the forefront? It's such a major change from what NATO has always been.
Right.
That I think we're still trying to discover what this could mean, what it could mean for NATO, and whether this is really, whether this could be a model for the way of the modus operandi of NATO in the future.
Right.
Vice President put forward for the United States not becoming heavily involved again in Libya. Your other point about the engagement in Libya, I think it's not very much on the radar screen of public opinion. There has been a short uptick in the interest when there was the threat of the troops of Gaddafi really crushing the revolt and marching up to Benghazi, their stronghold. But since then, it's not very much in the public interest. So I think people will be very surprised if all of a sudden there would be really, for example, European boots on the ground. And I think there would be very little support of that in most European countries.
You've been listening to a conversation with Mr. Juurd Eijsvoogel. On behalf of the Atlantic Council, this is Sarwar Kashmeri. Thank you for listening.